All right, everyone, I was thinking about this the other day, that the Bernie Sanders campaign, like the failure, the dysfunction that it's been, which it is, it's a failed campaign, a monstrously failed one. In a two-man race, he can't even hit 40%, and is losing states by 30 fucking points. I would think that that qualifies as a failure. I was thinking that the failure, the reasoning behind the failure is actually a microcosm of the reason why socialism fails. Socialism fails because of centralization and bad decision-making at that central level. See, to administer a socialist state, you need a lot of bureaus, you need a lot of government power, because otherwise you lack the instruments necessary to have a welfare state. That's why when people say, well, I'm just a pro-welfare social democrat. No, you're a socialist. You believe in high levels of centrality. You simply believe in an industrial underpinning to pay for that. But there's really no big difference. You have a bit of capitalism propping your system up, but on that end it's still highly centralized. It's redistributionist. It requires enormous government power. It's just that people know how to balance a budget sheet better than outright leftists. It's really the only difference. Here's what I would say. If you look at the Sanders campaign itself, Bernie Sanders is his own worst enemy. I guarantee you that there were advisors and staff that told him, drop the label socialist because it's unpopular, number one. And number two, for Christ's sake, don't praise Fidel Castro. Don't you think that might be a bad idea, like a week out from the Florida primary, which is literally what he did? Whoa, Fidel Castro is an authoritarian, so I don't agree with that, but he did some good things. And some of the welfare systems there really worked. Well, no, not really, but Bernie Sanders is too stubborn to realize that. He's living in the 70s. He's a relic. He's a fossil. He still believes that he's in college and that it's cool and hip to be like pro-Castro, and socialism is cool and totally not a mid-19th century bullshit economic strategy, which it is. Socialism has failed. Most of the countries that label themselves socialist, or which socialists proclaim to be socialist, really aren't at this point. Again, they have a broadly capitalistic underpinning that in some cases is less intervened in than in the United States. The less bureaucracy, the less regulation, the smoother everything works. The more money is potentially made. If you want to distribute it later and then maintain a core bureaucracy, you have to make sure that it's severely limited, otherwise it doesn't work at all. Biggest problem with U.S. leftism is that they always want to strangulate things with more bureaus. They're unwilling to do what other leftist states have done and try to streamline things more to at least make them more efficient. That's basically the only way you can get even a limited socialist state to work. With Bernie Sanders, he wants to maintain all of the state power and all of the state convolutions you currently have and then overlap more layers on it like fucking lasagna. Well, you know, lasagna's great. You add cheese and noodles and sauce and all sorts of other good things. I like zucchini in it myself. Some people hate it. But, I mean, if you keep adding more and more layers, eventually it's like, you know, you put it in the oven. What are you going to do? You're going to have to cook it for 10 hours to get the middle to be cooked. The outside will be like char. Eventually, at some point, you achieve maximum lasagna-ness, maximum lasagna efficiency. Sanders doesn't understand this. So Bernie Sanders is a microcosm of why socialism fails. Socialism fails because that centralized system gets more and more convoluted and complex, gets more and more bureaucratic and regulated, less and less efficient. At some point, you've surpassed maximum efficiency, and it's all downhill from there. Likewise, Bernie Sanders runs a highly centralized campaign. He had to have ignored his staff when his staff said, don't praise dictators, that's a bad idea. Don't use the term socialist because nobody supports socialism, except for under 30 Democrats specifically. No Republican or independent bloc supports socialism. Most Democrats don't support socialism either. What you get is a situation, cat's getting all jumpy over here because her sister's wriggling around under the couch. What happens is that Bernie Sanders is in part his own worst enemy. He's responsible for the failure of his campaign. Other people probably could have run his campaign better than he did. That's the long and short of it. Also, when you think about it this way, there's a budget problem at this point. Bernie Sanders is losing money. Biden had this problem initially. Biden has his own campaign problems. Biden's problem is apparently he's like that Civil War General McClellan who couldn't make up his mind, and he'd sit there like strategizing for weeks, and the enemy meanwhile would outflank him or dig in. And so he constantly made mistakes and eventually got sacked. I think they put General Hooker in after him, if I remember correctly. I apologize, a U.S. history teacher from high school. Really great class, by the way. Civil War history is interesting stuff. That's sort of like Biden. He's indecisive. With Bernie Sanders, he's decisive. He's just too stubborn. He won't drop the shtick about being, basically a revolutionary. Well, people don't want you in that position. You're not. You're a crazy old man, essentially. That's what Bernie Sanders represents. That's the other part. Socialism is also an outdated ideology. It's an age-old, shitty concept. It's never worked. It's never going to work, fundamentally. The only way to get it in name to work, even in part, is to have a huge capitalistic underpinning to support it. Well, it's almost impossible to maintain a system like that long term. Eventually, those industrial groups want even less regulation. They get at odds with the working class, and then everyone squabbles, and wedge issues are employed, and you have a big problem. I guess you would need a broad civic culture that just was disgusted by such behavior in order for it to work long term. The U.S. definitely is not that culture, by the way. The U.S., if anything, is getting less socialistic over time. In everything except the amount of bureaucracy, but that's just a tendency of a military superpower. Unfortunately, it seems like that happens to whoever the military hegemon is at any given time, and if you have a bipolar world, one of them eventually kills itself off, like the USSR, which partially did that by military spending. They were trying to keep up with Reagan's Star Wars and stuff like that. It would have been funny if we had, nukes mounted on satellites, or at least an orbital laser system or something. We'd probably develop it. Rods from God, something like that. I know. My chat here is a little bit off the rails, but then again, I'm talking about Bernie Sanders. He's a fanatic. And we need to call him, that's the other problem, we need to call him what he is. He's not normal or moderate. He doesn't have sane ideas. He's a fanatic. He's crazy. The ideas that he proposes in the way he proposes them can't even be paid for. He can use all the fuzzy math he wants. Well, we can pay for this program with a 2% business tax increase. We can pay for that with a little more property tax. Yes, but you add them all together and then see what the actual sum total is. You're not talking about any of these little taxes working. You still come up with the necessity of doing one of two things. You either need to massively raise taxes on the working and middle class, which he almost gets around to admitting to at certain times is more cognizant moments, or you're going to have to massively inflate the currency. You're going to have to turn it even more into a fiat funny money that'll be increasingly worthless. Thus, by the way, harming the lower classes and forcing you to subsidize them through additional welfare. Well, okay. How is this anything other than roundabout equalization and therefore commie light? How is this anything different than an attempt to lump the middle, working, and lower classes together? What's the one group of people that doesn't have to worry about such a system? Oh, the rich. The super rich don't have to worry. They'll still be super rich. And now, of course, it's not like they'll own less of the economy. It's just they'll have, arguably, over time, they'll have more money because the money will be worth less. Their value's not going to decrease. Except they'll have to sell off some of their businesses in order to pay the new business taxes, thus causing spiraling unemployment. That's the problem. Nobody else will be able to buy them up other than the government. Everything will just end up nationalized. Bernie Sanders' plan is a roundabout way long-term to nationalize basically everything. That's basically what it boils down to. And that's the final problem with him. He's a goddamn scam artist. Bernie Sanders is a scammer. He's scamming his fans out of large sums of money to try to get attention and to try to push an ideology that he's probably sane enough to understand is not going to take hold. It was funny when Donald Trump gave his first State of the Union there and said that socialism would never take hold in America, and then Bernie Sanders was sitting there looking all worried and twiddling his thumbs. It's pretty funny. That's about all. Peace out.